What does it take to get your podcast in front of millions of listeners on the podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, and more? In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to do it. This was the biggest mystery for me before I started my podcast. I had no idea how to take my edited file and distribute it with the world. I've seen people in the past submit their show to SoundCloud and circulate that link, but I wanted it to be on those podcast directories. The first piece to your podcast submission puzzle is choosing a host. The podcast host takes your podcast file and uploads it and stores it in the internet, and then allows you to add your description, show notes, and podcast art. Your podcast host creates an RSS feed and then sends that feed to the podcast directories. I'll tell you more about that later on in the video. Once you're set up with your podcast host and your podcast is submitted to the directories, you won't have to worry about this again. Each episode you post will automatically go live. But what podcast host should you choose? All hosts allow you to submit your show to the podcast directories, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. There are a ton of hosts to choose from, and they're quite similar with their features. So we'll be creating a whole separate video on the best host. So make sure you subscribe to the channel to see that. James, what is a podcast directory? This is just another name for your podcast app. Think of your Apple Podcast, Overcast, Pocket Cast, etc. There are a ton of apps out there to get your podcast on. However, a lot of podcasts use the data from Apple Podcast, so you only have to submit to Apple to get them onto these directories. Here is a quick list of directories that pull in your podcast from Apple Podcasts. The exceptions are Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Amazon Music, which all use their own technology to host podcasts, so you need to submit those separately. Getting your show onto the podcast directories is actually pretty straightforward and is usually a case of just submitting your RSS feed. Let's go over to the screen and take a look. Right, we'll start off with Apple Podcasts. The first thing you need to do is go into your host and get your RSS feed. So I'll go into Indie Bytes here and I'll click RSS feed, and I know that my RSS feed is feeds.transistor.fm/indiebytes. Your host will have a slightly similar but different RSS feed. So I'm going to copy that to my clipboard so I've got it ready. Then you're going to go to podcastconnect.apple.com or itunesconnect.apple.com and log in with your Apple ID. If you haven't got an Apple ID, create it at this point. So you can see that I've already got my podcast submitted here. You can see Indie Bytes is already submitted to the podcast directory. But if I wanted to add a new one, I click plus in this top left-hand corner, paste in my RSS feed and click validate. As you can see here, it will say can't submit your feed as your feed was previously submitted. But what it will do is it will pull in all of this information from your podcast host, all of the episodes you've got already uploaded, and then you click submit. And then you'll have to wait a few days. It usually takes between 24 and 48 hours for Apple to approve your podcast. And this is the only time you'll do it. And you can go into Podcast Connect and it will say active. In order to get your podcast submitted to Spotify, you can go to podcasters.spotify.com and click get started. You can then create an account, or if you've already got an account, you can log in. You can see here, Indie Bytes is already connected, but say if I wanted to add another podcast, you go to the left-hand corner here, click the three dots, then click add or claim your podcast. You can link your RSS feed and get your stats from the Spotify dashboard. Click get started and paste your RSS feed in here. This will then work very similarly to the way Apple did. You click next and it will say, yes, this is your podcast. And then what it will do here is it will verify that it's actually you that own the podcast. And when you set up your podcast with your host, you'll put an email and it will send a code so you can verify it. Now I'm verified, I'll click next. Set all of your info. Add your subcategories. This will help with people finding your podcast. And then you can click submit. And now your podcast will be on Spotify. To submit your podcast to Google, head to podcastmanager.google.com. You can see here, again, I'm signed in and my Indie Bytes show is already on here. So I'm going to click where it says Indie Bytes, click add show. Again, submit the feed. I'll use a different feed for this one. It's called Feel More, Buy More. You can then preview the episode and the feed that's here. Again, same thing with the verification code. to the email that you set up in your host. It does verify this just so not anyone can claim ownership to your podcast. Here you go. So now my podcast is on Google Podcasts and I can see that it's been submitted onto the platform. So that is how you get your podcast show onto the podcast directories. First of all, pick your podcast host, generate your RSS feed, and submit that feed to the various directories. And now, once you finish your recording on Riverside.fm, you can publish to the podcast apps straight away. We love hearing from you podcasters that are out there creating your shows. We're interested to see what podcast host you use. I personally use Transistor.fm, but leave a comment. Let us know what you use. We're going to be producing a bunch more videos on this YouTube channel about podcasting, video interviews, and more. So if you want to learn more about starting and growing a podcast, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss an episode. Thanks for watching.